Hello!
Oh!
Welcome back to another episode of Skomer Live. It's another beautiful day here in Pembrokeshire, and this series we've already brought you quite a few wonderful wildlife, but we've got lots more to come, haven't we, Lizzie?
Yeah, it's been a really good way to kick off the series. We're halfway through already. We've had shearwaters, we've had live cameras, we've been looking at some interesting behaviour, chatting to some of the wardens, of course, the main stars of maintaining a brilliant island that we love on Skomer, and of course you guys have been a big part of that. So what are we up to today? We've got competitions, we've got some more videos to show you. We've
All sorts.
all sorts.
But on the subject of the competition, we do have another competition, as Lizzie said. I think this one is actually a little bit more difficult, but we realised we've not actually told you guys what the competition prize is yet.
Yeah.
So this year, for the competition prize, we've kindly been donated some prizes from Wildlife and Landscape Award-winning photographer Drew Buckley, and he's kindly donated 3 signed copies of his newest book called The Puffin Book, which, surprise, surprise, is about puffins puffing. So it's a really good read, a really good summer read, and it's full of amazing photography.
Yeah.
So if you want to get your hands on one of those, enter the competition.
Yeah. They are a bit hard this year, to be honest, but I would say that you may know Drew Buckley from around Pembrokeshire, around on the islands. He runs workshops, he's a friend of the islands, and he, honestly, his photography is brilliant. It's next level with some of his images. So give him a follow, definitely, and I'm really excited to see the book, actually. He's got lots of good stuff out there.
Yeah.
So what is the competition? Well, we thought we'd mix it up today. Instead of going for visuals, we were going to go for audio. So we've picked 3 calls. I'm sure the wardens will know this within a blink of an eye, but we want you guys to get all 3 right. Might be a bit hard, that one, but here they are. Here's the first call. Let us know what you think it is. Have a listen to this. What do you think?
I actually do think I know this one.
I hope you do.
I think I do, only because I was on Skomer on Monday.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure.
You heard a bit of it in the background?
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a familiar call, but a good one. Good start. Second call, maybe a little bit harder. Have a listen. So with this one, I think it might throw a few people because of the type of call that it is.
Okay.
I don't want to give too many clues. Yesterday I gave a lot of clues. So. And the final one, have a listen to this. Do you know that one?
No. I don't know. I don't think I do know this one. I think this is hard. It's my favourite though. I do like this one.
Do you?
Yeah.
Wait, so you do know it? Oh,
I don't know.
call.
Yeah, it's my favourite call. I don't know what species it is.
Okay. I want to say it's one of my favourite seabirds, but you know, my
said
track
that
record.
every episode. Every episode you said that.
I know, but anyway, let us know what you think they may be. If you guess a few of them right, we'll see actually who put the names in the hat, really, for me. So you guys have been brilliant. So yeah, let us know and we'll reveal the answers at the end of the episode.
Right. Now it's time for us to see everybody's favourite bird. Well, not yours probably. This is probably the one bird that isn't your favourite. It's the puffin, and we're going to be joined by Annette Fayette, who is an Oxford University researcher who spent a long time on the island with these puffins.
I do love puffins, for the record.
They're very cool.
Hi, I'm Annette Fayette and I'm a researcher at the University of Oxford, and I've been studying the puffins on Skomer for the last 10 years. Now there's about 12 to 15,000 pairs of puffins on Skomer. It's quite a large colony, and they're actually doing pretty well here. So puffins generally in the North Atlantic have been declining, but Skomer is an exception, with puffins having a high breeding success, and actually the population is increasing, which is really nice to see. One of the reasons for this might be because there's actually plenty of food for puffins to feed their chicks in the summer. And I've actually done a study on this recently because I wanted to find out how far they go to find food and where they go and find the food for their chick. To do this, I used these very small GPS trackers. This one weighs only 6 grams, but I even used some smaller ones that we attach for a week or so on the back of puffins, and it measures where they go at sea to find fish for their chick. And what I found is that a lot of trips were quite close to the colony, on average 12 kilometers away in St. Bride's Bay and around the island, but some of the trips were actually much longer, all the way into the Celtic Sea, with maybe 50 kilometers or even 70 kilometers away. So these are pretty long trips for small puffins. Now, in contrast, I've done the same work on other colonies where the populations were declining, like in Norway and Iceland, for example, and they had to go and feed much further. So what's happening here on Skomer is that there's plenty of fish close to the colony, so that makes it easier for puffins to feed their chicks and have a growing population.
Lovely to see Annette there. Lovely to see.
Yeah,
And she actually, we featured it in last year's episode, all about the puffin tool use. So using that stick to scratch yourself, which is, as scientifically described, as I mentioned yesterday, that came out last year, I believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, really exciting. Next, we are, of course, going to go over to our wonderful wardens. In fact, Keris is going to join us today because everyone. So hello, Keris, if you can hear us.
Hello, can you see me?
Hey.
Hi.
See you, Keris. Hi. Thank you for time to chat to us on such a busy day. I know you've got very busy weeks. Obviously, tourists are still landing on the island as well as all the other wildlife excitement. So I wanted to start by asking you first about something I noticed to do with North Haven this year in particular. It seems to have changed a little bit because of a landslide.
Yeah, so that came as a bit of a shock when we first landed on the island 2 weeks ago when some of the team had come over to do checks. There hadn't been a landslide, and when we arrived there was, and it must have been over 40 ton of rock had come down just below our boat shed and blocked the slipway there, which obviously we used to get our boat in and out of the water. So there was a lot of shoveling.
Yeah, it sounds like you had quite the hard work on your hands with that landslide.
There was a lot of rocks from the pictures we saw. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't envy you there. Now, one species that we haven't really covered that much about this year is the grey seal. The grey seals are around Skomer all year, but in particular during September and the autumn months when they're pupping. So how are their numbers doing this year, Paris?
So we've, during the year so far, we haven't sort of done a significant amount of counts. We'll do that more when they all come into pup. So we anecdotally think, oh, it's good numbers in North Haven at the moment or not. But I'm afraid I don't have an answer for you on that yet. But they're really looking forward to the season, to getting our first seal pups. It feels like it'll be a blink of an eye between the seabirds leaving and the seals starting. It's quite amazing.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see those seal pups.
I love the transition actually from the seabirds, the attention then moves on to perhaps the autumn migrants that arrive on the island and the seals. It's always a bit of a pleasure seeing that on Skomer Island. And of course you carry out long-term monitoring of seabirds, which we're going to be hearing more about later with some very special guillemots and Professor Tim Burkhead. But there's a few questions I had that we had from the audience kind of wanting to know more. Firstly about the guillemot jumpling. How do you monitor their jumping behaviour? What kind of time of day do you go out?
We don't do extensive monitoring on the jumping itself. What we do is we assess the productivity of particular plots. So people will go and they'll monitor plots from arrival through egg laying, through rearing chicks, and then once they get to the jumping age, then you assume that they have jumped at about 15 or 16 days. But Tim will know better than me. But when you do go just to enjoy the sight of the jumplings, that evening tends to be best. It's getting a bit darker, and hopefully less of a chance of being predated. And it is absolutely hair-raising to watch them plummet off the cliffs, and hopefully not bounce too much along the way.
Oh, yeah, because I guess a lot of people have seen footage of it but never actually seen it with their own partly because they tend to go earlier in the day or when it's quieter. Is that right?
So mostly evening. So that's when we most often see it. As it's getting towards dusk, and the cliffs just it's like a crescendo of noise. They get louder and louder with the gargling and with the peeping of the chicks. And it's quite amazing. And they try to flap a little bit just to help themselves along. But obviously they don't have flight feathers yet, so there's only so much that can do.
Love that. You
Amazing.
can see it coming almost. And last thing about the monitoring, people want to know how you count birds. Is it a case of getting your scope, getting comfortable and counting when you are looking and monitoring seabirds, or is it specifically for species, like certain species?
So sometimes you can get comfortable, sometimes it's not so comfortable. We have to count, so we count all of the seabirds on the island, all of the cliff nesting seabirds, so our fulmars, kittiwakes, razorbills, guillemots. These are counted in the first 3 weeks of June. And what we do there is you've got to count the whole island, which is split into sections, and in each section you count sort of one bird at a time, depending on how many counters you've got, but you'll have 2 people per bird. So for example, you'll have guillemots in North Haven, so you've got 2 people counting the guillemots in North Haven, and so what you do is you've got clickers and you've got binoculars or a scope. You click once for each bird that you see, and if your counts are within 10% of one another, then you accept that count and move on to the next species. If they aren't within 10% of one another, then you start again and you keep going till they are. Now this is complicated by the fact that we can't see everything from the land, so then you count from the boat, which takes a strong stomach, because a combination of swell and optics can be fun, but we do it on the calmest days possible. And then once you've done the whole island, you do it again. So 2 counts for the first 3 weeks of June. And then the sheer water census is done at the same time, and that's done by playing, you go to transects and you play the calls down the burrows, you go back and forth, and every burrow that you find, you play the call, and then you do a click for yes if you get a call in response, and you get a click for no if you don't. So it was a busy few weeks.
Yeah, that sounds like
Brilliant.
you've been very busy doing that.
Brilliant job.
Incredible. Now, when you're on Skomer, how close the puffins get, but they're actually pretty cheeky birds, and I think we've actually got some footage here of some misbehaving puffins. So why are they so inquisitive and mischievous?
I mean, sometimes I wonder, because you'll see them wandering along next to birds which could quite easily have them. I suppose that they, unlike the Manxies, they've got the advantage of being able to sort of take off quite quickly, or scurry away into their burrows. But as to why they're so mischievous, I don't know. Couldn't tell you. I love them.
Yeah, big characters. Last thing before we go to audience questions, Keris, I just wanted to share the clip that you sent because it is wonderful. It's the lesser black-back chick pipping, fantastic pipping of the shell. Thank you for sharing it with us, because I don't think many of us see that.
No.
Pipping actually is described for initial break through the shell. And did you know there's an internal and external pipping? So
Yeah.
they break through the air cell, kind of internal air cell, and you get the shell. Did you film this, Keris, or I'm sure you see this all the time on the island? It must be magical.
I did film it, but that particular film was the first time I'd ever seen it, so it was pretty exciting for me as well. I have seen it a few times since, but yeah, it's quite amazing, that whole process. And of course now they're great hulking things. They're fledged and they're calling away to mum and dad to feed them. But yeah, to begin with, the pipping and then hatching and then just tiny little chicks.
So much hard work just to break out of the egg and take their first breath.
Yeah, love it. Right, audience questions.
Cool.
Do you want to start?
Okay, I'll start with the questions. So we have the first question from Christine Greenway, who asks, what cetaceans have you seen this year? Any minke whale sightings?
Sadly, no minke whales. We and harbour porpoise. Actually, we saw both common dolphin and harbour porpoise yesterday. So yeah, they've been lovely. It's always exciting to see a sort of fin break the surface of the water. And at the beginning of the year, we were lucky enough to, Leighton and I, who were on at the beginning of the season, we saw a superpod of common dolphin. So yeah, that was over 100 individuals. That was pretty special.
Whales showing off. Whales showing off. Rob Adams asked, are there any little owls on the island?
There aren't. There used to be. They used to breed out here. They've not been seen here since 2018. But although they are very sweet, this is our storm petrel population. A study that was published in 2004 showed that about 14.8% of little owl diet on Skomer consisted of storm petrel. So yeah.
Yeah, storm petrel, you do not want that at all.
No,
yeah, okay,
definitely.
well, yeah. Last one.
Right, what's the next question?
Harold T asked, I've heard that Skomer has its own species of vole. What is the difference between the Skomer vole and the mainland vole? So I'm guessing they're referring to maybe the bank vole. I visited the island twice but never spotted one. Third time lucky. Smiley face.
Oh well, the Skomer. No. So the Skomer vole's a bit bigger. It looks very much like a bank vole. And anecdotally, it seems to sit tight a bit more in the face of predators rather than scurrying. But that is purely anecdotally.
Honestly, I've seen once. It's a fleeting moment. It's quite special.
Oh, you need to go.
Own vole.
Oh, that's incredible. Evolution at work.
Yeah, there we are.
Right.
All right, Keris. Lovely to chat to you. Who are we catching up with tomorrow? Is it Leighton?
I believe you'll have the pleasure of Leighton's company tomorrow.
Wonderful.
Amazing.
All right. Well, thank you for checking
Thank
with
you
us
so
again.
much.
And we'll see you on Friday,
Bye.
Keris.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Talking about. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Amazing. It's so
Brilliant.
amazing. Right. Now, time for those live cameras again.
Yeah.
Ready for this? So, we're going to head to our first live camera.
We're actually going to see with you what
We're going to
camera.
watch these
So,
two. So,
this is one of the webcams. A bit
go.
more empty now.
okay. So, a little bit earlier, there were a lot of puffins on this area of the island. Now you can just see.
So there's one that's just landed in. So what you'll see now as we head towards the evening is that, and you can see them kind of coming in and out. This is sand eels and all that food. So there's a lot of activity at the moment. If you maybe were watching this camera about an hour ago, maybe a bit earlier, there was probably a lot just standing on the North Haven side there. But looks pretty good so far.
Puffins enjoy living in these large numbers, in these big colonies. And normally they get along pretty well, but that doesn't mean they don't have their disputes. And what you might often see is a thing called gaping. So if they have a little argument, they'll both open their beak, open their wings, make themselves look bigger, make themselves look tougher, and normally that will settle the dispute. One will win over the other. But sometimes things go a little bit further, and they'll lock beaks, have a little wrestle, have a little tussle to determine a winner, and that'll actually draw a crowd of about 10 or so other puffins to spectate. So
I haven't actually seen much of that on the island, but I have seen the classic gulls coming in and flushing them all out. So you may see a lot kind of coming off and coming back around as well as you watch this at this time of day. So let's go over to our other live camera now to go see Seren. So you guys named Seren. If you're just tuning in today we asked you to name the shearwater chick, and about 20 minutes ago the shearwater chick was moving, was slightly preening, but at the moment it's a bit like a grey rock sat at the back of a box. So you'll see a bit of material in there, a bit of dust. The wardens and the team on the island have, I believe, cleaned that lens since, so you can have a good look. But right at the back there's a shearwater chick, and it's important to remember that the shearwater chick is currently in a really important developmental stage, and at the end, where the parents will finish rearing them, and these shearwaters will actually end up leaving the island at end of August. They will have about 8 days on the island then to try and fend for themselves and surviving on their fat reserves. And actually Leighton, head warden, who we're chatting to tomorrow, is here to tell us a little bit more about these charismatic species.
You know what it looks like? Candy floss.
It does.
That's so fluffy, isn't it?
Candy floss.
So here on Skomer we have the largest population of manx shearwaters anywhere in the world, and I feel pretty privileged to be living here. The most recent estimate, which was from a study done in 2017, I think, estimated about 350,000 pairs of Manx shearwaters on Skomer. So when you take into account the number of chicks out here as well, we're probably topping nearly 1 million birds in the autumn as well. So really quite impressive. In the evening, when it's really windy and the weather's quite bad, you can really believe how many birds there are on here because they just absolutely pile past the haven. They lay a single egg in the burrow and they incubate them for around about 50 to 51 days. And then after that, tiny little cute grey fluffy chick hatches, and they spend another 70 days in the burrow being fed by the parents at night, and they can reach weights of about 50% greater than the adults. So the adults weigh around about 400 grams, whereas the chicks weigh, at their absolute peak, they can weigh nearly 600 grams. And then coming towards the end of the fledging period, so we're sort of looking, peak fledging will be in late August, early September. During that period, the adults will actually abandon the chicks in the burrows, and the chicks will live off their extra fat reserves, come out of their burrow every night, practice their wing beats, practice their flapping, take their first flights, and then eventually when they're down to the right weight, they'll head off, and they'll head straight for the South Atlantic and off the coast of Argentina and Brazil.
There we go. Love it. Love shearwaters.
Love them.
Now we need to push on because I'm very excited to welcome back Professor Tim Birkhead, who did join us last year to tell us all about the evolution of that fantastic, one of billion eggs, it must be absolutely in the world. So he's been zoologist at Sheffield University and has been studying guillemots for over 40 years. His long-term monitoring, I believe, is one of the most thorough and long-standing bits of research on species like guillemots in the UK and in the world. He really is the leader in that area of research. I'm pretty excited because the guillemot egg in itself is fantastic, and Tim is also fantastic. So hello, Tim.
Hello. Hello.
Hey.
Hello. Lovely to see you again. Those who may not have caught up on last year's series, we're going to delve back into exactly what your research is all about, because there's many different components, but even now I think people are still getting confused about some of the reasons, the theories behind the evolution of that fantastic guillemot egg shape. So please can you summarise a little bit more about what you do and what your research is about?
Okay, well, I started a PhD on guillemots in 1972, which is ancient history. And the idea was to try to understand why guillemots on Skomer and in southern Britain in general were declining at that time. And of course, 3 years was completely inadequate to do that. And so after my 3 years, I just kept going. So this year was the 49th season on Skomer. And for a long-lived bird, for a bird that lives probably 40, 45 years, you need a long-term study to try and understand its population biology. So that was the initial aim, to just understand how the population works. And after about 30 years, I mean, it just sounds like a complete labor of love. After 30 years, we had enough information to do that. And basically what that showed was that the Skomer population of guillemots is more or less self-sustaining. So the number of chicks that are produced are sufficient to replace those adults that die every winter. That doesn't mean that there isn't a bit of immigration and emigration. We once had an immigrant from the Baltic, which was very exciting, but immigration and emigration are fairly low. Once we'd figured out how the population works, we moved on to other things. And one of those other things was trying to understand why guillemots have that wonderfully shaped piriform or pear-shaped egg, which I was very pleased to have come up with a solution that was different from those rather fanciful ones that people often talk about, eggs spinning like a top and so on. It's nothing to do with that. It's just that pointed shape helps to keep the egg more stable. Because it's got a long flat edge, it stays more stable on the ledge, so it just is more difficult to dislodge in the first place. But really in the last 10 years or so, the main focus has been on monitoring the guillemots and making sure that we understand exactly how many there are and how well or how badly they're doing. Because in the rest of the guillemots range in the North Atlantic, Northern Scotland, Faroes, Iceland and so on, guillemots are having a really, really tough time. Climate change has caused the ocean currents to shift, moving the food away from commuting distance from the colony. So it's a bit like you, depending on your bicycle to go to Sainsbury's, but suddenly Sainsbury's is only in Inverness. You know, it just wouldn't be economic for you to cycle up there because by the time you'd got back, it would be time to go back. So the birds in the northern part of the range are having a really tough time. Skomer's unusual, along with some of the other colonies in southern Britain, in that they're actually doing remarkably well at the moment. Numbers are increasing at about 5% per annum. So this is exciting, but monitoring it and keeping tabs on it is absolutely crucial because there are several threats looming on the horizon. First is climate change, which I can say some more about in a minute. The second are the plans to have wind farms in the Southern Irish Sea. We all want green energy, but we don't want green energy at the expense of Skomer's seabirds.
Yes, the environmental plan moving forward very much talks about wind farms on our coast, but actually this is going to prove hugely detrimental too. And we don't really fully understand, I guess, the impact of that. But for a place like Skomer Island, which is so important for internationally and nationally important seabirds, that is an issue. I want to go back to that reference to climate change, because obviously we have seen an increase in severity and the number of storms that have impacted some of the seabirds on Skomer, like our black-legged kittiwakes. Have there been similar impacts on the guillemots?
There have indeed. There are 3 climate change effects on guillemots. One, by monitoring every year since 1972, when the guillemots breed, there's a very clear pattern that breeding has become earlier and earlier over the last 30 or 40 years. So guillemots now breed at least 2 weeks earlier than they did in the 70s. That's a huge change. So that's because there's a general warming. And then there's the effect of storms, and that's a twofold effect. First of all, winter storms are more severe, and a few years ago, 2014, the massive storm caused a huge wreck of guillemots, causing extreme adult and immature mortality. So you knock the population back dramatically. And then this year was probably the most unusual season on Skomer that we've had, in as much that there were 2 major and 1 minor storm in May. So to have storms during the actual breeding season is very unusual, and the effects have been dramatic. We had as a consequence of this, we had the lowest guillemot breeding success that I think we've had since the 1970s this year. And that was because the storms either wet some of the eggs or chilled some of the eggs or forced the birds to abandon their eggs, leaving them unattended. And as a consequence, the embryo inside the egg died. The poor old guillemot parent doesn't know this, and they continue to incubate for about 3 weeks longer than normal, with keeping their fingers crossed that the egg might still naked, and of course they didn't. So the consequences of that was a much reduced breeding success. So climate change is increasingly an issue for Skomer's guillemots, and probably some of the other seabirds as well on Skomer.
That's huge, isn't it?
Huge.
If I may just ask, that's increased incubation time. Does that also impact the overall fitness or survival of the guillemot adults as well?
That's a good question. So it's difficult to know whether incubating itself is energetically costly, but it almost certainly reduces the amount of time that the adult can feed for itself. So I suspect it is probably quite costly. In the past, I saw, just maybe once every few years, an egg that had been temporarily abandoned, and the bird would come back and sit on it for whatever reason. And sometimes those birds would continue to sit for an extra 3 weeks. And after literally a total of 50 days, that's 32 days of normal incubation plus this extra 3 weeks, they kind of something in their brain goes, oh my God, this is it, this egg is not going to hatch. And then they make that decision. So that suggests that to sit any longer would actually be more detrimental to the adult birds.
Wow. So interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Now, talking about the shape of the egg, I know you said they have that pear shape to help them keep stabilized on the surface of the rock. What were the other hypotheses that you went through that proved to be wrong?
Okay, well, one of the earliest ideas, and this goes back to the 1830s, was that pointed shape would allow the egg to spin like a top if the quote was, if it was blown by the wind or not by the other. But that's absolute nonsense, because that was based on an empty, blown eggshell, which is incredibly light. And you could take an empty guillemot egg and you could spin it and you go, whoa, there you are, it's self-evident. But you could take an egg of any shape, of any species of bird, and spin it. So they all spin. So that's, complete nonsense. It's the worst experiment in the world. That was then dismissed fairly quickly and replaced by another experiment, which showed that if you had a guillemot egg on a gently sloping but very smooth surface, it would roll in an arc. That's a consequence of it basically being cone-shaped. And everybody went, oh, of course, this must be the answer. But in fact, if you look carefully at the way that was done, there are several reasons why that doesn't work either. First of all, it has to be on a smooth surface. I've studied guillemots for nearly 50 years. I've hardly ever seen a smooth surface. They've always got little pimples and irregularities. So the egg rarely flows or moves in that kind of smooth trajectory. Secondly, and crucially, if you measure the arc of that trajectory, it's generally much wider than many of the guillemot ledges. And thirdly, if you were going to have an egg that was going to roll to safety, you would position the egg such that if the egg was disturbed, it would roll inwards towards the cliff edge, not outwards. But guillemots always incubate in a way that the egg would roll outwards. So there's lots of reasons why rolling in an arc is not a sensible explanation. And the crucial thing is that with this long pointed egg, they've got this big, flat, straight edge. And that means that there's a lot of egg in contact with the rock surface. And that contact provides lots of friction, so the egg won't move. And if you make a comparison with a razorbill egg, which is much more rounded, they have hardly any bit of their egg in contact with the surface. And those birds always nest in a level horizontal site, whereas guillemots have the flexibility to breed on sloping ledges. And they have to be able to do that because to breed successfully, they have to be part of a dense group. That's to protect themselves from gulls and ravens. To be part of that dense group, you have to be super flexible in your choice of nest site. So sometimes you get landed with a very steeply sloping site, and a guillemot can cope with that. So that's the reason that pointed egg shape has evolved.
Brilliant. Really
fascinating stuff.
Obviously, Tim, we talked last year about this ongoing work. It is ongoing. So how can people watching support you and the research project that goes on Skomer?
Okay, well, as I say, I've been working on Skomer since 1972, and then during a period of about 25 years, what was then called the Countryside Council for Wales provided some funding for the project that allowed me to employ a field assistant who does the day-to-day work. I go 2 or 3 times each season under normal circumstances to make sure everything's going okay. But then when Natural Resources Wales took over from CCW, one of the first things they did, rather sadly, was to simply stop funding this guillemot project. I was then faced with a dilemma. I could have just gone to Skomer and thrown my laptop into the sea and gone, stop it, I'm going to retire, and given up. And somebody said, why don't you try crowdfunding? And I was a bit skeptical. I said, that'll never work. But with the help of Sheffield University, where I've been employed for a long time, we did make it work, and it was staggeringly successful. And since 2014, the Guillemot project on Skomer has been funded through crowdfunding, and that has been successful. It's an ongoing challenge for me because the salaries involved in paying the field assistants go up every few years. The costs of travel, costs of accommodation, the costs of buying the rings, the cost of buying the climbing equipment, everything's continually going up. So even though I've retired as such from the university, I continue to fundraise for that project. And I really enjoy doing it. And every talk I give, the fees from that talk contribute to the Guillemot project.
Brilliant. There we go. You can support Tim and the ongoing research. I'm sure you all know of Tim's work and appreciate how important long-term monitoring really is. So Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been lovely to chat to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. I love that.
I love always. I always learn something new, and
Yeah.
it's
I learn so
really
much.
interesting. And I could talk about eggs all day.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, the guillemot egg as well, I think that's got to be my favourite.
Showstopper.
The shape, the colour, beautiful.
Showstopper.
Beautiful. But now it's time for another showstopper, because we've got another film for you guys. And this one is about tube noses. And I don't think we've actually covered tube noses yet on the show. So
So we have a whole host of seabirds over here on Skomer. One of my absolute favourites would have to be the northern fulmar. If you've been over here with us, you may well have seen them sitting along the upper crags on cliffs where they like to breed. They like to breed in those upper ledges, or you may well have seen them soaring around in the winds, depending on quite how windy a day it was when you visited. These birds are really distinctive, so at first glance you may well mistake them for a gull. They're a lovely white colour, and I think they've got a really beautiful face as well. But the key thing with these birds is how they fly. They have a really stiff wing pattern. Their wings are spread out nice and flat and straight in the wind, and they really do soar. These birds are the kings and queens of the sky, I always feel, over on Skomer, particularly as that wind picks up. They're incredibly graceful to watch and absolutely stunning birds. You could spend a whole afternoon sat on the cliff just gazing at the fulmars. They're in a really interesting order, Crystallariforms, so it's the same order as the albatross and petrels, and they've got a couple of really interesting characteristics, which includes this tube nose. This is really important not only for smell. They have a fascinating and really good sense of smell. They're able to find food over great distances, but also for filtering salt water. So these are birds that actually drink the seawater and can filter it into fresh water using this tube nose. There's also a really interesting story about where they got their name from. So the word fulmar in Old Norse is foul gull, which comes from an interesting habit they have of throwing up when they are startled. This is particularly the case in the young and the chicks. It's a really good self-defense mechanism to protect them from predators. So fulmars lay a single egg. They incubate this egg for about 50 days. We actually had our first chick over here on Skomer on the 29th of June, so they're a little bit later in the season than some of our seabirds. And these chicks will have 46 days approximately before they fledge and go into the big wide world. The population over here on Skomer is relatively stable. It's been stable over the last 20 years or so, but it has had historic fluctuations in numbers. Last year, so in 2020, we had about 580 pairs over here on Skomer. They are threatened by plastic pollution in the oceans. So a study found that of the fulmar stomachs they looked at, around 93% of them had plastic in their stomachs. The fulmars had ingested plastic, so there's a real threat for the species. But as you say, the population is relatively stable here, and while we still have them, we love watching them soar around off the cliffs. They're magnificent birds.
Love fulmars.
Love 'em.
Yeah. Also, thank you to Colin Dalton for the image of the fulmar and the chick as well. Getting that close to a chick, he must have a long lens. He must be a photographer. I think he
Must
is
be.
actually. So thank you, Colin, for that. Brilliant.
Right, what's the
What's
time
up
for
next?
now? Competition.
No, audience questions.
So
Audience
first,
questions.
okay, do those
Right,
first.
start with one. You take this
Do you want me to take the first one?
Yeah,
Okay, so we've got Harley and his mum asking, are there any adders on the island? Because they've seen a huge slow worm when they visited.
Good
So
question.
you're absolutely right, there are slow worms, but sadly there are no adders or any snakes at all, really. It's probably not that sad for the birds, actually. They're probably
it's
happy about that.
Probably a good thing.
But slow worms, obviously they look a bit like a snake, but they're lizards. And then the one other reptile that we do get on the island is the common lizard.
Yeah.
And you can find slow worms and common lizards in the meadow areas, woodlands, things like that, hiding under rocks and logs.
I know that the team sometimes have metal chutes down. This is a really good place to see lots of reptiles, and of course slow worms are the coolest. They're a bit odd looking, aren't they? Legless lizards, but they're actually, when you get up nice close to them, I've seen quite a variety in colour. I don't know how many you've seen, but something like a nice pale grey or a nice kind of reddishy brown, pinky. Lovely. Get quite big as well.
Lovely. And they're not worms either, and they're not slow, so
who knows?
Who named them that?
Who? Tell us. Write it in. Okay, next question. What has been the most exciting spring migrant on the island this year? So we asked the wardens, and they had a lesser grey shrike, which is the third only ever on the island, which is pretty exciting. And it's slightly smaller than the great grey shrike, which is a brilliant bird. So that's a brilliant first. A woodchat shrike as well they've had on. So for any birders, creatures, I should say birders really, that are on the island, then it's a really lovely sighting there. And the 13th record on the island of the western subalpine warbler, which is really nice, important for these big colonies that we go on and on about, but actually as a kind of a stopping point for a lot of migrants, both in the spring and the autumn. So we said it in the episode 1 and 2, come to Skomer Island, even in late summer. You never know what you may see as well as we push into autumn. It's really, really exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is time. Is it time for the competition now? Because I really want to know what those called.
Yeah, okay, so competition reveal. So the first one, you must know what that is.
Yeah, well, puffins, right?
It is puffins, so have a listen to this. Good, cool. How's your puffin impression?
I'll do it if you do it.
Go, you go first.
You go first.
Oh, that's been ages perfect.
That was quite good. Okay. Oh.
Amazing.
Better.
Vote in. Who's was better? No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Okay. So obviously the puffin. The second one. Let's hear it first.
Okay.
Any clues? Any guesses? Guesses?
I think it's quite distinctive, but I don't know.
Bit of a hard one. That is the barking call of a shorted owl. So it's a territorial call from an adult, which when I first heard it, I think it kind of threw me because I'm thinking of, I guess, the most obvious call of an owl.
Yeah,
it's a shorted owl.
Amazing.
Third one?
Third one. Yeah, should we have a listen to that one first? Do you know what it is?
Yeah. It's a storm petrel.
Storm petrel. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course it's a storm petrel.
You may know your seabirds, you may not, but actually if you were to kind of put your headphones on and listen to the call of a storm petrel, there's almost like 3 parts to it. But the first initial sound is like a chew turk. It's kind of like a 3-section call. I need to work on my storm petrel, but it's hard to describe. But that first bit, I don't think you could quite hear it then on the live. You may not be able to hear it, but go away and just spend the evening listening to storm petrel. Storm petrel calls, they're the best.
Or go visit Skomer and have a listen for yourself.
You can't actually see them on Skomer. You can see on Skomer then.
Skomer then. Go visit Skomer.
Anyway, right. So we're back tomorrow at 6 p.m. same time.
Yeah, same time. Yeah, that's it for this show.
Yeah, thank you all so much for commenting and sending in your questions. Of course, to the wonderful Keris and Tim for joining us today. And we'll see you again tomorrow at 6 p.m.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.